Isabel's current favorite show is Doc McStuffins. And you've got this song, time for a checkup. So if we start with the checkup this morning, can you find your heartbeat on your wrist, your pulse on your wrist, or perhaps on your neck? And you've got to make sure you do it with your fingers and not with your thumb, right? Because your thumb's got the pulse in it also. And if we were to check our spiritual pulse, what would we find? Today, Paul addresses that subject of spiritual health in the text we read from 1 Timothy. And he writes, "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant or to put their hope in wealth, which is uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides for us everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life." While the idea of richness has many meanings, the truth is that we in the United States are materially blessed when compared with the rest of the world. There are those of us who may be less materially blessed than others, but the fact is that by most standards we are extremely, as a whole, very well off. It often seems that the more we have, the more we keep worrying about keeping what we have and about getting more. And when that becomes the focus of our thoughts, then expressing faith in God can become more of a challenge. Paul's solution is to put our faith in God. He suggests that we do good things, that we be rich in good deeds, that we be generous and willing to share. And this morning with the children, we shared some of the things we love about our church, like the singing, like coming together to see our church family. This is why I wrote them down, like the food. I was not expecting the kids to say the food was their favorite part. Donuts and juice. Coming together as a church family to eat, which we do as fairly often. There are a variety of ways as a church that we do good together and that we are rich in good deeds. And then Paul says that there's a difference between just living in our culture and living a Christian life, what Paul calls truly life. Anyone and everyone can just live and merely survive. Jesus came that those who might believe in him might have abundant life. That's from the Gospel of John. A life where at the end God tells us, "Well done, good and faithful servant." It reminded me of the old Garth Brooks song, "Standing Outside the Fire." And I was considering kind of old. It's from 1993. And I actually even asked me, can I call it an old song? It's from 93? That's not old. Okay. So it's like all right, so Garth Brooks song from 93. Not old. I'll cross that out. Standing outside the fire. The refrain to that song is, "Life is not tried, it is merely survived when you're standing outside the fire." You can just go with the flow, let things happen to you, not think about how we do things or why we do things or take any risks. Or you can act and you can work to prevent things from happening that you don't want to happen. You can take risks and things that go on in the wider culture you don't have to go along with. It doesn't have to be that way. Paul says, don't be proud. Don't place your hope in uncertain things like money. Instead, place your hope in God, who generously gives us everything for our enjoyment. And that's where that Old Testament reading from the 6th day of creation comes in. God says we are to take charge of the fish and the birds and the animals and every creeping thing. He says he gives us grains and fruits to eat and enjoy. Our psalm says God gives us our food in due season. And when God opens his hand, we are filled with good things. We serve a generous God who likes to give us good things. We are made in his image, as we read this morning, which means that we were made to also be generous and to give good things and to share with others. That's why Paul writes, do good, be rich in good works, be generous and ready to share with others. And that's how we get to the life that is truly life, this life abundant. In stark contrast, our gospel this morning, often called the parable of the rich fool. This is one of my favorite books as a kid. It's a bedtime story. Don't ask me why. And I can still see the illustrations for this book in my head. Jesus tells the story of a very wealthy man, the owner of a large farm. And one year produces this bumper crop, so large he doesn't have enough enough room to store it in all his existing barns. Jesus shares the man's internal thought process. He considers what to do about this problem. He doesn't decide to give it away. He doesn't decide to sell it. He doesn't consider giving his workers a bonus. He really wants to keep all of it for himself. So he builds a bigger barn on his property. Current barns aren't big enough, he'll build bigger ones. He thinks this harvest ought to last him the rest of his life. And he says to himself, you've done well, you've got it made, you can retire now and take it easy. Have the time of your life, no worries. However, as he goes to bed that night, God speaks to him and says, fool, tonight you will die. Now who will get the things you have prepared for yourself? And Jesus adds one final comment to this story, that this is the way it will be for those who hoard things for themselves and aren't rich towards God. Jesus' whole point in this story is to watch out and guard yourselves from any kind of greed, because your true life is not made up of the things that you own, no matter how rich you may be. Your life is not defined by your possessions, and getting to that point where God says, well done, good and faithful servant, depends on what you do with what you have. Do you do good? Are you rich in good works? Are you ready to share with others? My experience here has been that this is a church that is ready to share with others. This rich fool obviously wasn't, though. And while he had a materially comfortable life, it wasn't abundant life. It wasn't the life that is really life. I was reading from Bishop Snasey, who's the Methodist bishop of the Missouri Conference, and he talked about building nests. It was quite interesting to talk about. Building nests is often a metaphor to describe people who have successfully provided for their own comforts. If someone arrives at a career change or career position of ease and security, friends say, you've built quite a nest for yourself. And the idea of nest kind of gets shelter, coziness, home-like, comfortable. But Bishop Snasey points out that the nests that birds build aren't for the birds who build them, but for their young, but for their next generation, for the future of the species. The hours of carrying straw and sticks and mud, and the days of defensive watchfulness, and the weeks of endless feeding are all for the benefit of the new ones, the young, and the future. And that's why I consider nests that we build in the church. Buildings, programs, ministries, the services we build. This was part of a reflection. Are they for our own comfort and coziness, or are they to further the faith and provide for future generations? Does our giving serve us and our needs, or serve God by serving the mission of the church to reach new people? It's food for thought. And kind of like adds back to the rich fool, that the rich fool built those bigger barns to provide for his own comfort and security, and made up a nest, if you will. The highest praise I've ever heard given to a congregation is that they were forward-thinking. It means they were planning and designing ministries around and for future generations. It means they weren't just thinking of the children, but of the children's children. It means that when they built a new building, they had the next generation in mind, and they didn't assume the next generation would be just like them and have the same likes and preferences. It means they planned for their church's survival, and not just survival, but abundant life, the life that is truly life. They recognized that they'd have to adapt in some ways, and they recognized it meant that things couldn't always go on the same way. They recognized it meant that they'd have to give and share and do good. You see, sharing and good deeds result in caring ministries, which we have quite a few of here at our church. We have our nursery downstairs, starting Sunday school next week. The Sunshine Girls go out and visit. Fun and Fellowship brings together many of our folks to come hang out and eat and play games here at the church. There's much to love here at our church, as we heard the list this morning. And I don't think we celebrate those things quite often enough. In fact, if you've got more to add to my list, I would love to hear it, and perhaps we'll put it on a bulletin board and list some of these different ways that we do good, some of these different ways that we have caring ministries, some of these different ways that we share. We wouldn't be here if we didn't think that this church did good things. And so I'd like to hear more of the reasons why over the next few weeks, more of these sharings. Or if you have a tangible reason, you'd be willing to share on a bulletin board, to bring it in, please, and let's put it up and post it and share it. Next week, I'll ask more about specific people in the church who made a contribution to your spiritual growth. And you can come prepared next week to share and to celebrate. Let us pray.